My name is Claire Whitman. I'm 32 years old, and on New Year's Eve, at 11:47 p.m., my husband put the car in drive and left me standing alone on a freezing ferry dock in a thin party dress. No coat, no phone, no ride. Just 15 degrees, a dead parking lot, and the taillights of the man I'd been married to for 6 years disappearing around the bend like I'd never existed. I stood there for 40 minutes before a stranger finally stopped. I told myself it was a misunderstanding, a fight that got out of hand. People don't just abandon their wives at midnight in a Wisconsin winter. But husbands also don't drive 2 hours home without once picking up the phone to check if I was alive. By the time I got home, I already knew something was very wrong. I just didn't know how wrong yet. And 12 days later, he'd find out I knew everything. The fight started 20 minutes before midnight, in the car, on the way to watch the fireworks over the lake. Small at first, I'd said something about his sister's comment at dinner, and he'd gone quiet in that way he does right before he explodes. Then it wasn't small anymore. "You always do this," he said, gripping the wheel. "You always have to make everything about you." I didn't even know what this was. I asked him to just talk to me. He didn't. He pulled into the ferry dock parking lot, said he needed air, and told me to get out for a second so he could think. I got out. He drove away. I stood there in my heels and my thin black dress, watching his taillights shrink down the road until they were gone, and for a second I actually laughed, because surely, he was circling the block. Surely he was coming back. He didn't come back. The wind off the lake cut straight through me. 15 degrees, maybe colder with the water beside me. My phone was in my purse, still in the car. I had nothing. No coat, no ride, no way to call anyone, standing completely alone on an empty dock while somewhere behind me the town was counting down to a new year like nothing in the world was wrong. I remember thinking, this isn't him. This isn't who I married. I didn't know yet how right and how wrong that thought actually was. I stood on that dock for almost 40 minutes before headlights finally slowed down beside me. An older man, maybe 60, driving home from his own quiet New Year's. He rolled down the window, took one look at me shaking in a party dress with no coat, and just said, "Get in, it's freezing out here." I didn't even think twice. I climbed into a stranger's car because my own husband had left me safer with him than with the man I married. He didn't ask questions, just turned the heat up and drove me the 2 hours home in silence, glancing over now, and then like he was checking I hadn't frozen solid in his passenger seat. I thanked him more times than I can count. He just nodded and said, "Happy New Year," like he hadn't just done something my own husband couldn't be bothered to do. When I finally walked through our front door, it was almost 2 a.m. The house was dark, warm, completely undisturbed. And there he was, asleep in bed, breathing slow and even, like the last few hours had never happened at all. No missed calls, no texts. Not one "Are you okay?" Just him, sound asleep, like leaving me stranded in the cold on New Year's Eve was something he'd already filed away and moved on from. I stood in the doorway for a long time, just looking at him. And that's the moment something in me went quiet. Not sad quiet, watching quiet. He woke up the next morning like nothing had happened, stretching, yawning, asking what was for breakfast. I just stared at him until he finally looked up and said, "Look, about last night."
I don't even really know what I said.
"I just needed space, okay? I'm sorry." That was it. No explanation for the 2 hours. No mention of how I got home. Not even a question about whether I'd been safe. Just a vague, rehearsed little apology that sounded like something he'd practiced in the shower, not something he actually meant. I said okay. I let it go. Out loud, at least. But inside, something had shifted, and I started noticing things I'd normally never think twice about. His phone, which usually sat face up on the counter, was suddenly always face down. When it buzzed, he'd glance at it and then pocket it fast, like a reflex. And later that day, doing laundry, I found a receipt balled up in his jacket pocket, a bar tab, 2 drinks, time-stamped 11:52 p.m. New Year's Eve. 10 minutes after he drove away from me at that dock. I didn't say anything. I just folded the receipt and put it in my drawer. Then, that night, a text lit up his phone while he was in the shower. Just a name on the screen. A name I didn't recognize, and a name he flinched at 3 days later when I said it out loud, testing him, watching his face change before he even had time to lie. That was the first real crack. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I made a decision that first week, and it was this. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry in front of him, or demand answers, or give him any reason to think I suspected a thing. Because I knew him, if I came at him with anger, he'd have 3 days to build a story before I even got the truth out of him. So instead, I got quiet.
Calm.
Almost warm. I made his coffee the way he liked it. I asked about his day. I laughed at his jokes. And every single time I did, I watched him relax a little more, convinced he'd gotten away with something. Underneath all of that, I was paying attention. Really paying attention for the first time in years. I started logging into our shared bank account under the excuse of budgeting for the new year, scrolling through charges from the past few weeks. I checked our shared cloud photo backup, the one that autosaves everything from both our phones, and started noticing timestamps that didn't match the story he told me about where he'd been. I wrote dates down in the Notes app on my phone, quietly, like I was building a case instead of living a marriage. The strange thing was, the calmer I acted, the more unsettled he seemed to get. He'd ask me if I was okay, a little too often. He'd watch me out of the corner of his eye when he thought I wasn't looking. He could feel that something had changed, even if he couldn't name it. He had no idea. I already knew exactly where to look next. By day 6, the pieces stopped being scattered and started forming a shape I didn't want to see. I pulled up our shared cloud backup one more time, this time cross-referencing it with the bank statement dates, and there it was, a name. The same name that had lit up his phone in the shower. It showed up in his call log 4 times that week, always late at night, always right after he'd told me he was just going for a drive to clear his head. Then I found the charge. 11:52 p.m., New Year's Eve. A bar less than a mile from the ferry dock. 2 drinks. The same timestamp, almost to the minute, as the receipt I'd already found balled up in his jacket, which meant he hadn't driven off to think. He hadn't circled the block or gone anywhere near clearing his head. 5 minutes after leaving me stranded in the freezing cold in my party dress, he'd driven straight to meet her. I sat with that for a long time, just staring at my phone screen in the dark of our bathroom, the only place in the house I could be alone with what I now knew. It wasn't a fight that got out of hand. It wasn't him needing space. He had used me standing on that dock, shivering, as his window to go be with someone else. Timed it almost, like he already knew exactly how long he'd have. I didn't cry this time. I just took a screenshot, saved it to a folder I'd started calling taxes, and closed my phone. 12 days in, I finally had everything I needed. Now I just needed him to slip. By day 12, my calm wasn't calming him down anymore. It was doing the opposite. I'd stopped asking where he'd been. I'd stopped checking his phone when he wasn't looking, at least where he could see me do it. I was just steady, pleasant, present. And that steadiness seemed to be eating at him more than any accusation ever could have. That morning, he was scrolling his phone at the kitchen table, and I caught him watching me over the top of it, the way you watch something you can't quite figure out. Finally, he set it down and said, "Why are you acting so different lately?" I just shrugged and said I didn't know what he meant. "You're just weirdly fine. About everything. Since New Year's." His eyes narrowed a little. "Did you go through my phone or something?" I looked up at him slowly, and for the first time in 12 days, I let him see something in my face other than warmth. Just for a second. Long enough for him to notice. "Should I have needed to?" I asked. He didn't answer that. He just stared at me, and I watched the color shift in his face. That particular kind of panic people get when they realize the ground isn't as solid as they thought it was, when they sense they've been caught, but have no idea how much the other person actually knows. He didn't ask me anything else that morning, but I could tell he wasn't going to sleep easy again. That night, I finally sat him down. No yelling, no tears. I just opened my phone, pulled up the folder labeled taxes, and slid it across the table to him. 11:52 p.m., I said. 5 minutes after you left me on that dock. 2 drinks at a bar you told me you've never even been to. Want to explain that? His face went white. He started in with the usual, It's not what you think. I can explain. You're twisting this. But every excuse fell apart the second I laid the next piece down next to it. The calls. The timestamps. The name he'd flinched at weeks earlier when I'd said it out loud. Just to watch him. He stopped talking eventually. There was nothing left to say. 12 days of watching him scramble to cover something I already had documented down to the minute had told me everything I needed to know about who he really was and who he'd been for a lot longer than one New Year's Eve. I didn't scream. I didn't beg him to explain himself. I just told him, calmly, that I'd be staying at my sister's for a while and that I'd be in touch through my lawyer. I walked out that night warm, in a coat this time, on my own 2 feet, making my own choice. Not stranded. Not freezing. Not waiting for anyone to come back for me.
Free.
And for the first time in years, not sorry about it.